belonging to Blackness. Welcome to Season 6 of the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. India Lorick Wilmot. It's Season 6, and we are speaking with African descendants who endeavored to bring social awareness and positive social change across our diasporic communities. Today, we are thrilled to be in conversation with Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, activist, a legislator, a survivor, and the first woman of color to be elected to Congress from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Throughout her career, Congresswoman Pressley has fought to ensure that those closest to the pain are closest to the power, driving and informing policymaking. As Congresswoman for Massachusetts' 7th Congressional District, she has been a champion for reproductive justice, justice for immigrants, for seniors, workers, for survivors of sexual violence, for formerly and currently incarcerated individuals, and healing for those who have experienced trauma. She has also turned her experience living with alopecia into action, becoming a leading voice fighting to raise awareness and support for the alopecia community across the nation. Congresswoman Pressley currently serves on the House Committee on Financial Services and the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability. Prior to becoming elected to Congress, she served on the Boston City Council for 8 years and was the first woman of color elected to the council in its 100-year history. As you all can imagine, the timeliness of our conversation here today is critical given the current political and social economic climate in the United States, with elections to take place in less than 2 months. The futures of our communities are at stake and the whole world is watching. So let's get into it. Welcome, Congresswoman Pressley.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be with you. Season 6, quite the accomplishment. I'm glad to be a part of this emerging legacy here.
Oh, I love it. And we're so happy to have you here. This is a very important conversation that, again, my listeners in 80 countries are watching with bated breath to see what's happening in the United States. So let's get into it.
Okay.
Give Black Alliance is proud to support the podcast Belonging to Blackness, hosted by India Lorick Wilmot. The podcast is an exploration of all aspects of our Black communities, including gifts of time, talent, and treasure, while shedding a positive light on the African descendant experience globally. The Give Black Alliance informs, reforms, and transforms philanthropy to acknowledge and partner with our communities in order to bring about equitable change for all. To learn more about Give Black Alliance, visit us at giveblackalliance.org.
Act 1, Call to Adventure. Much of what inspires us and gives us purpose is autobiographically rooted. So like me, you too are an only child and a transplant to Boston. You attended Boston University, and dare I say this move was essential to your early foray into the work of Black liberation as a young adult through various leadership and congressional intern opportunities, including working with Senator Kerry. But let's pause and dig into your origin story a bit. How has your family life and upbringing inspired you to focus your Black liberation efforts on driving and informing policymaking for diverse communities?
Well, in every way. Our parents are our first teachers, and I had 2 extraordinary teachers in my parents, both in what they instilled in me, what they taught me, but also in what they were role modeling. And I don't just mean the perfect situations, like my father being a voracious reader or things like that. I mean, what I saw them endure, the indignities that they were subjected to in an unequal country. Those experiences that I had proximity to were also my teachers and really shaped my worldview and my Black consciousness. So my mother raised me alone in that my father was battling substance use disorder and was in and out of our criminal legal system. And my mother was a super voter, a proud Democrat, took me with her to vote in every election. My mother made a lot of sacrifices, working multiple jobs to ensure that I would not be denied or deprived any opportunity. And that meant because of all that she was sacrificing and how hard she was working in order for me to attend the school that I did, we were often faced with eviction notices, car repossessions. But I also saw my mother train men that were promoted over her and paid more. I saw my mother be medically gaslit by a healthcare system when she was struggling with uterine fibroids. I saw my mother return to work too quickly after a radical hysterectomy, collapsing on the street because she was worried if she took the time she needed to heal, she would lose her job. I grew up as a latchkey kid at a very young age at home alone, maybe even as young as 5. And my mother would tell me, don't tell anyone you're home alone because they'll take you away from me. But she couldn't afford childcare. And then my mother, in her leukemia battle, I was her caregiver. That was a labor of love, but it was labor. It's a great honor to do the work of centering someone's humanity and honoring their dignity when they're transitioning and doing everything also to try to extend their life. But it was not easy. So those experiences are why I fight so hard for pay equity, or why I fight to combat a system of medical gaslighting or apartheid, is why I fight for women's health, is why I fight for universal childcare, is why I fight for paid leave. So the confluence of her lived experiences and being proximate to them really have compelled me to do the work of lawmaking, because we were living in the residual aftermath of the war on drugs, welfare reform, and these sorts of things. Now, the other thing that both my parents, even while my father was incarcerated, instilled in me was a sense of responsibility to do the work of Black liberation, expectation even. I mean, I was probably 7 or 8 years old when my mother said to me, Ayanna Sowini is my middle name. Mother and my father, both very typical at the time, both took African names. So my mother's name is Sandy, but she was going by Kai. Kai Ayanna was her name. And my father's name is Martin. He was going by Latif. So my first coloring books were produced by the Chicago Defender, a very important Black newspaper. And they were of me coloring in the Black liberation flag and little Black girls and boys with afros with solidarity fists saying nation time. And my mother said to me early on, to be Black is a beautiful thing, something to be proud of.
Amen.
But we have an expectation that you will do your part. You've been born into a struggle. So it's something to celebrate your Blackness, but you've been born into a struggle. And I have an expectation you will do your part in that struggle in the work of liberation of Black people and all marginalized people. My father, while incarcerated, would send me the works of James Baldwin, Lorraine Hainsbury, Sonia Sanchez, Nikki Giovanni. So he really shaped my Black consciousness. First poem that I ever had to learn was a Langston Hughes poem. So both my parents were teachers. And then I would say the other education I received from my father, he attained 2 advanced degrees while incarcerated. He then went on to become a college professor and also a published author. And so although my mother was my main provider and caregiver, my father was still parenting from behind the walls, informing my Black consciousness. And I was getting an education on mass incarceration and the ways in which that destabilized our home, the ways in which I carried shame and stigma about that. And later came to understand that it was a disease that sent him there, and how unfortunate it was that his disease was criminalized, and that was the only way that he was ultimately able to get sober and to make his contribution in the world. And so that also informs a lot of my policy work in the criminal legal reform space.
What a journey. There was pain along the way, but then there were moments of joy. There are moments of opportunity. There are moments of pleasure that even in those instances, I presume, where you're missing your dad, that didn't mean there wasn't outreach in that particular way, that there wasn't still love, that there isn't grace and tender care that was given. The same thing with your mom. I love what you talked about in terms of care. It's a beautiful act of love to be able to care for someone as they're transitioning, but it's work. You could have done so many other things with your life. You could have taken so many pathways. So what would you say was that pivotal moment that confirmed to you that specifically politics was the pathway for your equity and justice work?
Well, no one believes me, but I think I took sort of a self-audit, probably at around 11 or 12, for a while there, because I've struggled with asthma my whole life. And I spent a lot of time with my pediatrician, and I loved my pediatrician. I thought I wanted to pursue medicine. not even fully understanding the range. I said, I either want to be a pediatrician or a neurosurgeon. I mean, please. But my mother, is someone who always nurtured and cultivated my dreams, would buy me brain models and, do anything she could, whether it's the game operation or anything like that, to nurture that. However, I was not good at science. I mean, I had so many tutors and after school programs. I mean, again, my mother was working multiple jobs to make these opportunities available to me. I just one day said, what do I already do well? And maybe this isn't a great message, because I know a lot of people, they sort of lean on that stick-to-itiveness and, you stayed at it and then you became, I think I just in that moment decided I'm going to lean in on what I already do well and try to master that, and be a lifelong learner and continue to evolve in that way. Even at the age of 10 or 11, I had an awareness that when I spoke, people listened. Whether that was in my grandfather's storefront church on the south side of Chicago, whether that was in the classroom, whether it was lobbying my teachers for something on behalf of my classmates, or even within my peer group socially. And because my mother was a super voter, also told me that we couldn't just leave the work of change to people with a title. That work was the work of all of us. In life, your job is what pays the bills, but your work with a capital W is your most important work, the upliftment of community, the betterment of society. And so all of those rubrics, that became my foundation. So from 7th grade to 12th grade, I was class president. I was a competitive debater through an organization called Junior Statesmen of America, representing the Midwest. Anything that was building me up so that I could build my community up, I pursued. I just followed the work ultimately.
I'm imagining little Ayanna lobbying, trying to do fundraising, bake sales to support whatever classroom initiative.
I definitely believe in the theory of nature, that I've been the same person my whole life. I went to a school that's K through 12. Up until 8th grade, you don't get grades. You just get these very comprehensive sort of notes, if you will, sort of analysis of you. And every single feedback my mother would receive would say, we enjoy having Ayanna in class, but she struggles to use an inside voice. So for all the kids who have been projectors, if you will, your whole life, you might be in Congress one day. And then the other, a lobbying story that my former classmates like to retell, my first grade teacher, one day I just said, I need to see the principal. And it was a very small school. And so you just had that kind of access. She said, oh, okay. So I marched over to the principal's office. I remember my socks kept sliding down and I kept pulling them up as I was walking. And when I got there, the secretary sort of bent down and said, Ayanna, we understand you want to see the principal. How can I help? And I said, yes, I need to see him. And if you can believe this, he came out and he said, what's the problem? And I said, well, first day of school, Mrs. Haynes said that she was my teacher, but ever since then, she's still been talking to all these other kids. It's wrong to lie. And she fibbed. Okay. So I just have to share that true only child, India. I mean, can you imagine? She's like, I'm your teacher. And I, in my possessiveness, thought that meant she could not talk to anyone else. Okay. So fast forward.
I love it though.
I would just say I've had 3 transitions. So I was an aide for 16 years. I think that, in my biased opinion, the best lawmakers are people who were former aides. It was an incredible tutelage. So I was an aide 16 years. When I ran for city council, that was a very tough transition because I couldn't turn off parts of my brain. I was sort of being an aide to myself. The transition from aide to elected was a big one.
Why was it hard to shift from aide to an elected official?
I was such a good aide that no one actually knew what I thought about anything. As an aide, hopefully you're working for someone for whose policies you're aligned. I mean, that's why you're working with them, right? You're not working 12, 14-hour days to support the advancement of a policy agenda you don't support. But you're not 100% in alignment. I always tell people, if you're looking for an elected that you're in 100% alignment with, then you should run. That's the only way that will happen. So it was about giving myself the space and permission to just be myself and to stand in that agency see and to share my worldview. I was such a good aide that people knew what John Kerry believed, what he cared about, what Congressman Kennedy cared about, Joseph P. Kennedy II, Joe's dad, that's who I worked for. But I had to define my voice and my priorities and my agenda. Quick story. Someone offered to do media training with me when I was running for the city council. I honestly didn't even know that existed, right? A dear friend, a respected journalist. And I said, okay. So they brought me into this room, they set up a camera, and we were just chatting before the interview. And then the interview started. And after the interview, they said, now we're going to watch this back. And what they said to me is, here's what I noticed. Before the interview, you were very animated, very engaging, very lively. The second the interview began, the camera turned on and you turned off. And you were sort of this politician prototype, not yourself. And when I watched it back, it was true. I was being performative, but I didn't have the language to even know that's what it was. And I was being performative, modeling who had been my former bosses. There'd never been a Black woman elected to the city council. So when you're your own analog, when there is no stabilizing reference point, it is easy to sort of think what you need to do is model what has already been instead of forging your own path. And I said, oh, you mean I can just be me? And that's such a simple thing.
Mm-hmm.
I did not realize that in my quest to demonstrate that I understood many of the unwritten rules, that I knew the uniform, I knew the verbiage, I knew the rhetoric, I knew the ways to signal to you, I'm no novice, I'm no amateur, but it wasn't in my voice. And so that interview was a very defining moment for me.
You know, Congresswoman, you are a powerful and commanding orator, and we are so appreciative of the work that you've been doing, not only when you were part of Boston City Council, but that effort, that legacy is transferred over into Congress. In today's political climate, there's still some challenges that you face as a woman, as a Black woman. So what does it mean to you to be a Black woman in politics? In what ways has it changed for you or stayed the same since you moved from Boston City Council to then serving the 7th Congressional District?
If Shirley Chisholm said how she wanted to be remembered is as a Black woman who dared to be herself, can I too be so audacious and just dare to be myself? So I had the transition from aide to elected, and then from city council to Congress after serving on the council 8 years. Since I started on the federal level, honestly, as an aide, I think in some ways it was an easier transition. And a welcomed one, because the whole reason I ran for office on the federal level is I had an understanding and appreciation for the ways in which federal policy had dictated so much. Many of the inequities and disparities that I wanted to close. I mean, the Mass 7th is a very unequal district, were shaped by federal policy. So to take things that I started working on the city council, like addressing the push out crisis, Black girls disproportionately being pushed out of our schools, for me to be able to take what I started there from the micro and now take that to the macro level, to advance federal policy, to address these things systemically. I mean, policy is my love language. Because when I started as an intern and later was hired by former Congressman Joseph P. Kennedy II, which we have to sit in that for a moment. I was an intern working 3 paid jobs for an unpaid internship. And 30 plus years later, I'm now the congressperson for that office that I started as an intern. The serendipity, I didn't orchestrate any of this. I mean, it's just all a greater design. I was a constituent caseworker working with our most vulnerable. So Social Security liaison, veterans benefits, answering the front phones. And that was where I really came to appreciate policy, because I was talking to people who were suffering because of well-meaning policy with unintended consequences, or because of harmful policy, what I would characterize as policy violence. And so I said, I want to get to the root of things. I'm going to follow the work. That work has ultimately led me to Congress. So if federal policy has legislated hurt and harm and created a $10 trillion racial wealth gap, the lowest Black home ownership in 6 decades, and I could go on, then it can also, and it must play a role in legislating equity, in legislating healing, and legislating justice. So I see all of this work when it comes to Black folks and the precise harm done to us as reparations. because it means to repair. You can't expect one bill to undo centuries of harm. You need an omnibus. You need a suite of bills to undo that harm that are precise, that are prescriptive, and that chart a different path forward. Also, federally, the thing I had to adjust to, being away from my family. A lot of people lose sight of that. That's my commute. I'm in Washington Monday through Friday. And then I come back, be present all over my district. I have to miss my links meetings because I have to go and be with my constituents, and then maybe get 4 or 5 hours with my family before I get on a plane and head right back. So that was something I had not been prepared for. And the national spotlight. Even though I was a city councilor who had a national profile, who was stumping for presidential candidates and very humble to receive national awards at that time, going to Congress under a Trump administration was unlike anything I could have anticipated or really been prepared for.
I think it's interesting in the ways in which we show up. And when you are that history maker, the first to be in that role at the Boston City Council, your authenticity resonates with folks. I would say for myself, as a Black woman, sometimes you don't always feel comfortable to show up authentically because people will turn around and say, you're being aggressive. So I can imagine for yourself as this woman that presents as a beautiful, emboldened Black woman in these spaces in politics, that I'm sure this level of representation is threatening to many.
Yeah, absolutely. I went out of my way to sort of age myself. I wore multiple strands of pearls and ascots at 20 years old and big brooches and scarves and things like that, which is totally fine. But I thought that those were things that I needed to do to signal my legitimacy, if you will. To be more palatable. I just want to be transparent about that. My evolution has been one where with each election, I felt more emboldened because the electorate was validating me as myself authentically with my bold red lipstick and hoops and my biker jacket and my Senegalese twist. And now with my bald crown as a Black woman living with alopecia totalis. That's a transformation not of my choosing. Very traumatic to lose all the hair on my head, my face, my body in a 5-week period. I had done so much work in my own journey of self-love, of my natural 4C curls, and loved my protective hairstyles. And the first time I had Senegalese twists, I felt like I met myself for the first time. That representation meant so much to so many because little girls would tell me and send me letters, and they had T-shirts, can a Congresswoman wear braids, rock a red lip, and a black leather jacket? And I was the affirmative answer. Yes, you can. To be robbed of my hair and something that was a huge part of my identity, I've had to summon new levels of appreciation for me. And I've made the decision. Wigs are not a part of my journey right now. They could be, but my husband likes to say that alopecia didn't rob me of my beauty, it revealed it, because people can see your cheekbones and your eyes and your lips. And before, you were just hiding behind that hair. And God knew exactly what he was doing, because I always joke and say, God is my barber, And it was my husband that said I didn't need hair to rock a crown. I still have one. That being said, it was challenging. But I've chosen to stand in it because, to your point, everything Black women do is political. So how I show up is in itself disruptive because it is challenging conventional societal norms about what is pretty, what is professional, what is appropriate. But I think I'm here not only to occupy space, but to create it for others. And I want everyone to show up in the world fully, authentically, and unapologetically, without fear, without discrimination.
Act 2, The Road. Congresswoman Pressley, how do you play? What brings you joy? What brings you pleasure? What are the things that fortify you, especially since this work can be isolating and hard, even though it does have its rewards?
Yeah, reading poetry, that's always just anchored me. And again, it speaks to the foundation laid by both of my parents. The early poetry that I read of Nikki Giovanni and Audre Lorde and Dr. Maya Angelou, those are still spaces that I return to when I need covering, when I need healing, when I need inspiration. I love poetry. I love solitude. I'm just a true only child in that way. You learn to enjoy your own company because you don't have any other choice. And some people think of it as very lonely, but I think it's a gift. A lot of people aren't uncomfortable just with themselves. I learned that early on. So I like my solitude. I do consider that its own form of play. And then, time with my family. I love to bowl. I grew up in a bowling family. I'm from
Okay.
Chicago, so very Midwestern in that way. More recently, I've come to really love pickleball. But I would say, honestly, me at my happiest, I'm a tea enthusiast. I
Mm.
don't drink coffee. So a great cup of tea, sitting on the porch, a book of poetry, surrounded by the people that I love the most, but who will also give me my space if I need it. So that's probably me at my happiest. And I love being in community. You can't do this work and not love people. When I have felt the most depleted, to go and be in community is what has restored me.
Correct. I mean, there's something to be said about the space of solitude and the stillness in it that is quite revelational. I'm a person who's also an introvert, so I almost need that moment to recharge so that when I can be out and in community, I can actually show up and feel authentic as myself because being around people does take a lot. You can enjoy it, but it's a lot of energy.
I think we're both naturally introverted and selectively extroverted. I always say, like, I love people, but I don't require them. And you're right, people can sometimes be depleting, but I also find being with people incredibly restorative and renewing, especially when I get to be home. Washington, D.C. is a very intense, fast paced environment. I don't know when I leave the house if I'm coming back at 9 or 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm not being dramatic. And it can sometimes become a very sort of transactional place. My husband and I collect vinyl, we collect records, and a lot of times people are leading with their A side. Like if you listen to an album, people think all the best songs are on the A side, but there's always these gems on the B side. When I can be with people and be in community and center something beyond just the utility of my labor, but just my humanity and just be, I'm so grateful because increasingly so, those moments are few and far between where you can be the B side version of yourself.
That's beautiful. And it's because of the B side version of you that you're able to then do the work when you're in the space of the A side. What policies and legislation are you most proud of? I'm making a lot of assumptions, but I would think that the Crown Act is one of them and legislation around reproductive justice. But, if it's those or others, what are you most proud of?
Well, first, I have to just contextualize for people that your only metric of contribution as a legislator in Congress is not how many bills you've passed, because usually you're having to introduce a bill multiple times in order to get it to committee and to move it. That being said, since policy is my love language, we are ferociously putting out legislation. And I've been fortunate. I think every good legislator and good movement requires strategy and stamina, and I've had both. I'll just list off some things. So I was the lead negotiator in the House on student debt cancellation. I'm very proud of that because that is a racial justice issue, economic justice, gender justice issue. Black women carry the most debt of anyone. We're the most educated. It's a $2 trillion crisis. People said that it couldn't be done. The president didn't have the authority. And we worked for 2.5 years to build a coalition of borrowers, civil rights organizations, tradesmen and women to say that the face of this crisis is diverse. This sort of policy will not be regressive in impact. It stands to lift up many. It's an intergenerational issue as well. And ultimately, the president did take an executive action, but was blocked by the Supreme Court. But we kept pushing. Again, every movement requires strategy and stamina. And so today, because of public service loan forgiveness, that being retooled, income-driven repayment program, and because we keep pushing for student debt cancellation, I hear from people every day who have had 6 figures of debt that has now been zeroed out, and they're able to purchase a home, for the first time, or pay for childcare, or, other essential things. So I'm very, very proud of that because, like I said, it required strategy and stamina, and it required consensus building. And that's something I really pride myself on. I'm not a consensus seeker. I choose instead the harder path of consensus building. One of my bills was signed into law by President Biden, the Post-Disaster Mental Health Act, which provides psychological first aid, if you will, mental and behavioral health services in the wake of domestic terrorism or an extreme weather event. So imagine something like Hurricane Katrina. If my bill had been in existence, everyone would have been able to access psychological first aid. I worked on that bill with a survivor of the Boston Marathon bombing who had no physical injuries but couldn't access mental and behavioral health services. And so I love that because it proves my practice that the people closest to the pain should be the closest to the power, driving and informing the policy making. So it shows the power of one. She sent an email to my office, said, I can't access these services. Will you help me? And we worked for 2 years to get that done. And President Biden signed it into law. The last two that I'll lift up, yes, the Crown Act, although we haven't passed it federally yet, to ban race-based hair discrimination. It is getting great momentum throughout the country, and many states have adopted the Crown Act, including the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, to ban race-based hair discrimination in the workplace, schools, et cetera. Finally, my baby bonds legislation. That's a bill I introduced with Senator Cory Booker, the American Opportunity Accounts Act. Shorthand version of that is baby bonds. I think it's going to go a long way in closing the racial wealth gap. And although we haven't passed that federally, it is adopted by many states, Illinois, Connecticut, California. Right now, they're looking at a pilot, Treasurer Deb Goldberg in Massachusetts.
Mm. Let's talk quickly about the power of the Black and brown vote. So history has shown us countless times all the ways white supremacist policies have attempted to disenfranchise our communities. And we've seen a steady increase of such legislation, particularly when it comes to voter suppression. So by my count, you probably have more accurate numbers, but I believe that there are over 40 US states that have introduced voter suppression bills since 2020. So I think that's a huge indication that such a collective effort indicates that the Black and brown vote means something, so much so that people are so focused on stripping it away. But when I think about this upcoming election, I think about my daughter, my youngest, who's about to turn 18 and will be voting for the first time in the next 2 months. What does voter suppression mean for younger voters like her, who may struggle to emotionally and intellectually connect with the pastime visuals that we grew up on, such as Eyes on the Prize and those sorts of docuseries, and understand the importance of Black voting and voter registration?
I appreciate that question because I have not found that it moves this generation to say people died so that you could vote. It's such an abstract for them. They think of the civil rights movement, which we're still very much in, as their grandparents. I mean, they know people who lived in that time, but it seems like light years ago, too abstract. And so, one, I think what contributes to voter suppression is not only the ways in which voting is actively being suppressed legislatively in state legislatures, but it's also when we don't make it convenient. I think Election Day should be a holiday. I think everyone should be able to early vote. I think there should be automatic registration. I think there should be same day registration. The more inconvenient it is, that is also a way to suppress. Also, there's a lot of disinformation and misinformation, and our young people spend a fair amount of time on social media platforms. Because of that disinformation and misinformation, that can also suppress the vote, where you feel so burdened or cynical about whether or not your vote even matters, or you could be misinformed about when an election is or what a certain office does. All those things contribute to voter suppression. And I also know that what contributes to voter suppression is disappointment. You know, if you have been disappointed, your heart has been broken, failed by broken systems, you have a deficit of trust in government and its ability to do anything additive or positive. And so I feel a tremendous responsibility to restore that faith for people by actively listening to them, by advancing responsive legislation, also working hard to advance policies that will make voting more convenient, more accessible. One of the amendments that I introduced, and I'm very proud because the late, great John Lewis was one of my co-sponsors, is to lower the voting age in federal elections to 16. I mean, I've worked on a lot of third rail issues that people consider to be polarizing, but I received so much hate mail about saying the 16-year-old should be able to vote in federal elections. But India, I think the earlier we start that relationship, you can't expect young people at 18 to spontaneously combust and suddenly care about government and to believe they have
Right.
a legitimate stakehold in it. We have to cultivate that relationship as early as possible. We need civic education in our schools. We need people to understand the importance of participating in elections at every level, and that politics is personal because it's about policy. And policies determine everything: who lives, who dies, who survives, who thrives. And I think more young people are coming to realize that with the climate crisis, with the public health epidemic of gun violence, with what we see happening in Haiti, with what we see
Mhm.
happening in Israel and Gaza, and what we see happening with attacks on our reproductive freedom.
We're about to vote in less than 2 months. What are the top issues for African descendants on this side? What are those issues that we need to pay special attention to?
Well, the act of voting, people are motivated by, I think, multiple reasons. Sometimes it can be self-care. Sometimes it can be harm reduction. Sometimes it can be self-preservation. And I think that's how people have to look at it, and just understand that you don't elect saviors, you elect partners. So do your homework and be thoughtful about who you want to be your partner. Part of partnership is accountability. And so for me personally, I know that Donald Trump is no kind of partner to me, and no one that I could hold accountable to anything, because he traffics in hate and division, in my opinion. And the extremist Republicans that I govern with every day are anti-woman, anti-worker, anti-immigrant, undemocratic. And again, I'll sit at the table and work with anyone in the name of progress, but it's very difficult to have an honest conversation with a dishonest person. And if you look at Project 2025, I'm on the Stop Project 2025 task force in Congress. This is a blueprint, a far right-wing manifesto of harm. And what I've learned with these extremist Republicans is that they don't make threats, they make promises. So
Mm.
2025 is a policy plan. It is a transition plan. It is an extremist march towards a national ban on abortion, which is a nation of forced birth, which would disparately impact Black women, because regardless of economic status or education, we still have a Black maternal morbidity crisis where we're 3 to 4 times more likely to die in childbirth or post-birthing complications. It calls for the banning of books and assault on our intellectual freedom, denial of our history and erasure of our contributions, a denial of our family models. So they want to ban books, they want to ban bodies, they want to defund public education, critical Title I K-12 funding. They want to dismantle the Department of Education. I worked hard to advance student debt cancellation. Well, you can't do that if there's no Department of Education. They want to rename the Department of Health and Human Services the Department of Life. It just is a frightening blueprint of harm. And it is institutionalized Trumpism.
Mm.
I would encourage people to do your homework. And it's not just about what we don't want. For me, it's also about affirming who we are and what we do want. And I want a nation where housing is a human right, where healthcare is a human right, where people can show up in the world fully, authentically, and unapologetically without fear and discrimination. I don't want a nation with bans on my hair, bans on my body, bans on my books. I want a nation with universal child care, with paid leave, with home and community-based services for the disabled and the elderly, a more just America that sees and centers the humanity and the dignity of every person that calls this country home. Every person. Project 2025 also calls for mass deportation of immigrants and incarceration. So it is a frightening, far right-wing manifesto and blueprint. We have to do everything possible to ensure that it does not become a reality. The picture that they are painting is not a world that I want to live in, and certainly not one that I want to leave to our children. And I'll close here. I had the opportunity to organize an Indigenous community not that long ago. And as I was leaving, one of the elders said to me, as you leave here, be a better ancestor than descendant.
Mm.
And that has never left me. And so I would just encourage everyone to think about that. What is a love letter that you want to send to future generations? When you vote, it is not just about you. It is an act of self-care. It is an act of self-preservation. It might even be a matter of harm reduction. But whatever you're doing, when you cast that ballot, it is not just for you. You are delivering a love letter to future generations. So ask yourself, what kind of ancestor do you choose to be?
Act 3, Where We Land. Honorable Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, thank you so much for being with us here on Belonging to Blackness. We are supporting and uplifting your work, but we also got some work to do ourselves.
Thank you.
Be sure to check out her Twitter account at Rep Pressley. In the meantime, thanks for joining us. Be sure to stay tuned for a new episode of the podcast coming soon. Until then, peace and blessings. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with others and be sure to subscribe. Find us on my website, www.indialoricwilmot.com. Follow us on IG and Facebook at belongingtoblackness_podcast for the latest fashion and accessories. Visit www.shopbelongingtoblackness.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.